What's going on, ladies and gentlemen? Christian at Horror here. Today, I want to talk to you guys about a 90s, what I would call a 90s classic. That movie is Pumpkinhead 2 Blood Wings. So I watched this movie last night for the first time, and probably since I bought that Blu-ray, it feels like it's been like 4 or 5 years. And I love the first Pumpkinhead movie. Like I said in my last video, if Lance Henriksen is in a movie, it elevates it to me. I love Lance Henriksen. I love the story of Pumpkinhead. I love how creepy that movie is. I love the classic vibes that the movie has. And I love, obviously, Stan Winston's effects for Pumpkinhead are some of the most amazing effects I've seen from that decade. What a way to kind of bookend the 80s, because Pumpkinhead came out in the latter part, 88, 89. So Pumpkinhead 2 takes place in 1994. Seems pretty random, right? Years later, especially after, horror had kind of sunk down a little bit, especially theatrically, but we talk about the death of 90s horror, but really, was it dead? I mean, I think in the theater it was thin, but if you walked into Blockbuster, if you walked into a video store, it seemed like you had a lot of options. So I was never really a big fan of saying that the 90s was a dead decade for horror. I really don't think it was. I think you just had to go to the video store. And speaking of direct-to-video, that's what Pumpkinhead 2 is, Blood Wings. This is what I think is everything that was right about the 90s. Blood Wings is perfect as a sequel to this great movie Pumpkinhead, because it basically, not necessarily flips Pumpkinhead on its head, no pun intended, but like it completely just has fun and says, okay, let's showcase this character more in this movie. You had to wait for it. You had to earn it in the first Pumpkinhead. We're going to give you Pumpkinhead and Blood Wings. We're going to give it to you all the way, and it's going to be fun. So one thing about Pumpkinhead 2 I think that's great is it's directed by the great Jeff Burr. Now, if you don't know who Jeff Burr is, he directed the classic Leatherface Texas Chainsaw Massacre Part 3, which has, quite frankly, one of the best horror movie posters I've ever seen. And it's a great entry in that franchise. Jeff Burr is a guy that when I talk to people who have met Jeff Burr, they all say he's the nicest guy on the planet, which I think is awesome. He also did Pumpkinhead 2 Blood Wings. This film stars Amy Dolenz and J. Trevor Edmond, as well as the dad who was in the first Hellraiser. So one thing I love so much about Pumpkinhead 2 is when you watch the movie, you're flooded with memories of these other horror films you love, like Return of the Living Dead Part 3, which is where J. Trevor Edmonds is from. Amy Dolenz was in a movie called Witchboard 2, which quite frankly I like way more than the first Witchboard. And, so you've got this great cast, and they're fun. The characters are fun. It's about a group of guys and girls doing a seance, resurrecting a demon. But they resurrect Pumpkinhead, which is probably more than they bargained for, to say the least. It doesn't have too much to do with the first movie. It does its own thing and kind of just has its own story. And I thought that was perfectly fine, The first Pumpkinhead stands like on its own as a one movie thing. So with Part 2 just kind of doing its own deal and being the great direct-to-video horror movie it is, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. Sometimes you don't need to continue the story if the story has a good bookend. And I thought Pumpkinhead 1 had a pretty darn good bookend. So I was totally fine with them, just evolving the story into something else. Again, this is a 90s horror film, and it's a direct-to-video movie. One thing that's interesting about these direct-to-video movies, I'm hoping somebody will know the answer to this. When they made television movies, they filmed them in what I guess you would call 4:3, which is like box television screens. But when they did direct-to-video horror movies, it seems like they still did them in like cinematic widescreen. So I wonder why that's the case. I mean, obviously now it's good because of the way we watch movies on widescreen televisions, but and this movie shot widescreen, like cinematically for the theater, but, it was direct-to-video. So I always found that very interesting how movies that were direct-to-video got that treatment, but not the television movies. But the thing I said that it's so great about Blood Wings is it's everything I think that is right about 90s horror. I love schlock and cheese 90s horror, and Pumpkinhead 2 has that, but the characters in this movie, of course some of their dialogue is sillier, it's 90s, but I really liked the characters. I mean, Amy Dolenz is so lovable, and she's anything you see her in, whether it be Ticks, Witchboard 2, or this movie, she's just got the most inviting look to her. You just fall in love with her instantly. And J. Trevor Edmond, I mean, he was great in Return of the Living Dead Part 3, so seeing him in this movie was just awesome to me. It's just so awesome. Like I said, you're flooded with memories of other horror films when you watch Pumpkinhead 2, and I think that's great. But the star of this movie is Pumpkinhead. Let's get that right out of the gate. You know, in the first one, like I said, you have to earn Pumpkinhead. He doesn't come until down the road in the film. But in Pumpkinhead 2, you get him, and they showcase him in this movie. And the thing that I love about Pumpkinhead in Pumpkinhead 2 is he looks fantastic, but just a smidge less than the first movie, which Stan Winston made the most amazing design. But it matches the look of the film. I'm not knocking it whatsoever because Pumpkinhead looks amazing in Part 2, but you'll get what I'm saying if you see Pumpkinhead 2. You know, this is a great sequel. I love it. You know, some of the scenes with Pumpkinhead really do kind of like take your breath away because, you know, he's an amazing looking character. So amazing. And the way he dies was insane, kind of jaw-dropping. The visuals of it, I won't spoil it, but, you know, this is a sequel that I think a lot of people like because it gives you Pumpkinhead. You don't, like in the first movie, it's more of the story about this dad and the son and the loss and grief of loss. And in Pumpkinhead 2, it's let's see him, let's enjoy him, let's put him on screen, let's have him tear people up, let's just destroy everything through this character. And that's a great way to do a sequel, I think. Give the people what they want. The people wanted Pumpkinhead. You know, there's some really interesting stuff about this movie, Blood Wings. I was reading Horror Hound, and I thought it was so interesting that there was a DOS computer game called Blood Wings: Pumpkinhead's Revenge that came out with the release of this movie. That is just shockingly cool to me. It's a Doom ripoff. I'm dying to play it. I can see if I can ROM it somewhere. I've always wanted to live stream playing horror video games, and that is the most perfect thing I could think of to do. So maybe we'll do that down the road. But I gotta be honest, I think Pumpkinhead 2 is in its own way just as good as Pumpkinhead 1. They're different films. And the only reason I'm not saying I like Pumpkinhead 2 more than 1 is because of Lance Henriksen. He's just, everything he does, I think, elevates films. He's got that great cinematic look to him. So I like him pretty evenly. But the only reason I won't say that Pumpkinhead 2 I enjoy more than 1 is because of Lance. Other than that, Pumpkinhead 2 has so much rewatch value, I couldn't even begin to tell you how many times I'm going to want to revisit this movie again. It is entertaining beyond belief. If you're a fan of Pumpkinhead, the visuals of them, but you've never even seen any of the movies, you know, you could go into 2 before watching 1. It's not going to be a problem. But I highly recommend going back and watching that first Pumpkinhead, then diving into Pumpkinhead 2. It is everything right about the 90s, in my opinion. I love it so much. So I'm going to give Pumpkinhead 2 a 9.5 out of 10. And in every aspect that it deserves that high rating is why it's getting it. So if you haven't seen Pumpkinhead 2, guys, definitely search it out and check it out. That Blu-ray from Scream Factory is out of print, but you can rent it easily on Amazon. Check your old DVD stores that may have used DVDs and Blu-rays. You know, go for it. Check the movie out. If you're region-free, I think there's options out there to get a region-free Blu-ray. It's awesome. Maybe we'll look at Pumpkinhead 3 and 4 soon. I haven't seen those, but Pumpkinhead 2 is money because it's directed by Jeff Burr, and it's got a great cast, and it's 90s fun, and that's all I want from it, and that's what it gives me. This is Christian Horror saying Pumpkinhead 2 is a must-watch for you guys, so let me know if you've seen Pumpkinhead 2 and your thoughts on it. I love it. Love you guys. See you next time.